King Alexander III of Scotland had reigned with peace throughout his realm until his death on the 19th of March 1286, leaving the heir, Margaret of Norway, to take the throne. However, she was but a child, so a provisional government called the Government of Guardians was formed. Unfortunately, on her voyage to Scotland, Margaret fell ill and died in the Orkney Islands on September 26, 1290. This became the great cause in Scotland, a power struggle to get the heaviest claim to the Scottish throne. With no clear winner in sight and civil war on the horizon, Edward I of England was invited to mediate. But before any proceedings began, he insisted that all contenders recognise him as Lord Paramount, meaning that he swore no obligations to the land that he was, in Edward's mind, to own. Judgment would finally swing in November 1292, with John Balliol having the strongest claim above all. This enraged Edward I, who summoned Balliol to stand before the English court in 1296. When John renounced his homage, England went on the offensive, storming Berwick upon Tweed. In April, the Scots lost at the Battle of Dunbar, and by July of 1297, Edward had forced John Balliol to abdicate. Andrew Murray would lead an uprising, and by the late summer of 1297 would control Uggahart, Inverness, Elgin, Banff and Aberdeen. As autumn fell, William Wallace would join in Dundee, and together they marched to Stirling. In the words of Stuart Reid, Stirling was traditionally regarded as the keys to Scotland. Meanwhile, John Warrenne had joined Hugh Cressingham in that July, and both arrived at Stirling on the 9th of September. But by that time, Moray and Wallace had already occupied Abbey Craig, a quartz dollarites north of Stirling. Warrenne feared the number of Scots he had to face, only being separated by the causeway and a narrow wooden bridge over the River Forth near Stirling Castle. Knowing the disadvantage, he would delay for several days to allow for negotiations and reconnaissance. On the 11th, James Stewart, followed by 2 Dominican friars, was sent as emissaries to the Scots. Walter of Guisborough writes that Wallace responded with, "We are not here to make peace, but to do battle to defend ourselves and liberate our kingdom. Let them come on and we shall prove this to their very beards." While camped on Abbey Craig, the Scots had control of the field, while the English army, made of Englishmen, Welsh and Scottish nobles, archers and foot infantry, camped south of the river. Sir Richard Lundy suggested to outflank the enemy by leading a cavalry charge over a ford 2 miles upstream, where 60 horsemen could cross at a time. Cressingham persuaded Warrenne to reject that suggestion, favouring a direct attack. The bridge that Warrenne feared was only wide enough for 2 horsemen to cross, but was the safest crossing, for the Forth would widen to the east and marshland lay west. The Scots simply waited, as the English would begin to cross the bridge on the morning of September the 11th. Wallace and Moray, according to the Chronicle of Hemingway, waited until as many of the enemy had come over as they believed they could overcome. Once an estimated 2,000 had crossed, the attack began. Scottish pikemen rained down from Abbey Craig and would fend off a charge from English cavalry, and then proceeded to counterattack the English infantry. They would gain control of the eastern side of the bridge, preventing reinforcement from the English lines. With little hope of retreating reinforcement, it's possible that a large majority were killed, while some could have managed to escape over the river. One man, Sir Marmaduke Thwaites, somehow managed to fight over the bridge with some of his men. John Warrenne still held the ground south of the Forth, with a large force and archers, but that meant nothing, as his confidence in victory was gone. After Sir Thwaites' escape, Warrenne ordered the bridge to be destroyed and retreated to Berwick, leaving the small garrison at Stirling Castle open to Scottish blades. Contemporary English chronicler Walter of Guisborough recorded the English losses to be around 100 cavalry and 5,000 infantry, while the Scottish numbers are unknown. except for one. Andrew Murray, who had marched to Stirling with William Wallace, had sustained a mortal injury during the fighting and would die 2 months later. The Lanicus Chronicle tells that Wallace had a broad stripe of Cressingham's skin, as it reads, taken from the head to the heel to make therewith a baldric for his sword. The Scots would continue to raid as far south as Durham, England. Wallace would be appointed Guardian of the Kingdom of Scotland and commander of its armies. But that was not all, as Edward was already thick into planning another invasion, which would all come to a head at the small town of Falkirk.